The stakeholders of a company are all the persons and entities that can influence or who are influenced by the actions of a company or an organization. Considering how important they are, a company must discover their stakeholders. They must identify and analyze each stakeholder group in order to determine the importance of it, so they know how much resources and how much time, energy and effort they should invest in communicating with these stakeholders. Considering this, we have 3 models to discover these stakeholders, and we will discuss them in this video. In the previous video, we discussed about the differences between the shareholders and the stakeholders of a company. To understand this video, you should know this difference, so please find the video right here in an annotation or in the links down in the description. Go watch it and come back at this video. Going on, the stakeholder model of an organization suggests that the stakeholders groups of a company should be identified because they should be addressed accordingly to the stake they have. In practice, when we discuss about addressing and communicating with the stakeholders, we actually talk about providing the different groups of stakeholders that a company has already identified, providing them with the relevant information for the stake they have. So basically, as a company, you have to tell everybody what they need to hear, and not what they need to hear, but what they are interested in hearing about your company. Let's see an example. To the financial investors and shareholders, a company will provide financial information about the operations and strategies of a company. This kind of information can be found in documents such as the annual reports or shareholders meetings. In the same time, another group of stakeholders, such as the customers, they will be provided with information about the goods and services, also about the offers and the promotions of a company through advertising, sales promotions, in-store communications and such ways. The main idea is that the bigger a company is, the more stakeholder groups it will have. The more stakeholders it has, the bigger the variety of stakeholder groups, because each group has a different kind of interest in your company. It is important that a company provides each stakeholder group with specific information and builds a strong reputation across exchanges with all these stakeholders. In order to be able to communicate accordingly to the interest and power a stakeholder group has in the company, an organization first must identify the stakeholder groups it has, and then it should analyze the influence each group has over the company. And they can do this following 3 ways to identify, or we have 3 models to identify these stakeholders groups. The 3 models are the specific questions, the Salience Model, and the power interest matrix. The first method to identify the specific groups of stakeholders you have as a company is to answer some specific questions that I will provide you with in a couple of seconds. What is to be mentioned about these questions is that they are quite broad and don't really provide a very detailed insight. However, they are accepted by the corporate communication methodology. So let's see the question. The first question is, who are the organization's stakeholders? To answer this, you should name all the groups of people who can influence or are influenced by the organization's activities. The second question, what are their stakes? What opportunities and challenges are presented to the organization in relation to these stakeholders? And also, what responsibilities, such as economic, legal, ethical, and philanthropic, does the organization have to its stakeholders? And finally, the company should answer in what way can the organization best communicate with and respond to these stakeholders and address the stakeholders' challenges and opportunities. Therefore, by answering these questions, a company can first identify the stakeholders groups they have, and they can also establish a communication method or a communication strategy with these groups. Another method, if you ask me, a bit more efficient, are called mapping tools. So for mapping stakeholders, what we talk about is identifying and positioning the stakeholders in terms of their influence to the organization. And we have 2 models that can provide this kind of information. There are 2 general tools or 2 general models that all the managers and communication practitioners use when they want to discover the stakeholders groups, and they are named the Stakeholder Salience Model and the Power Interest Matrix. And we will discuss first the Salience Model. The salience is defined as how visible or proeminent a stakeholder is to an organization based upon three main attributes: the power, the legitimacy, and the urgency. In the stakeholder salience model, stakeholders are identified and classified based upon their salience to the organization. So, in simple words, the salience of a stakeholder group is how important that group is to the company according to three main attributes: the power, the legitimacy, and the urgency. Basically, the companies analyze these three characteristics to determine the influence of a group of people or entities to their company. How much or how big can their influence be over the company, so we know how to communicate with these groups and address them accordingly. We already discussed that there are three main attributes that a company looks at to determine the importance of the stakeholder groups. They are the power, the urgency, and the legitimacy. Let's now see and analyze each one of them in detail to understand what they mean. The power means the power of the stakeholder groups upon an organization. The legitimacy means the legitimacy of the claim laid upon the organization by the stakeholder, and the urgency means the degree to which the stakeholder claims call for immediate action. The way this model works is by identifying the attributes that each stakeholder groups possess, and there are some groups, for example A, B, and C in this model, that only possess one attribute, and we will discuss them right now. In this model we can see that there are three stakeholder groups on the edges: the dormant, the discretionary, and the demanding stakeholders. We call these three groups the latent stakeholders, which are groups possessing only one attribute. The dormant stakeholders have the power to impose their will on others, but because they don't have legitimacy or urgency, their power remains dormant. For example, those who are able to spend a lot of money or who can command the attention of the news media. The second category, the discretionary stakeholders, possess legitimate claims based upon interactions with organization, but don't have the power to influence the organization, therefore their claims have no urgency. For example, these are the recipients of corporate charity. And the third category, the demanding stakeholders, they have very urgent claims, but do not have the power or the legitimacy to enforce them. These groups can be bothersome, but do not require serious attention. For example, a lone demonstrator who camps in front of a company. It might be embarrassing for the company, but typically his claims will remain unconsidered. We discussed the three groups on the edges, and we know they are called latent stakeholders. The further groups are classified as expectant stakeholders and are groups who have two attributes. The dominant stakeholders have both powerful and legitimate claims, giving them a strong influence on the organization. For example, the employees, the customers, the owners, and significant investors. The dangerous stakeholders have power and urgent claims but do not have legitimacy, so they are seen as dangerous because they may resort to violence, including wildcat strikes, sabotage, and terrorism. For example, in 2002, Philips introduced a flat-screen TV. An armed individual held several people hostage in an office building in Amsterdam because he thought the TVs communicated hidden codes. The dependent stakeholders lack power but have urgent and legitimate claims. They often rely on others for the power to carry out their will. For example, local residents of a community in which a plant of a large corporation is based rely on lobby groups, media, and political representation to have their concerns voiced and considered by a company. And finally, the definitive stakeholders, they have legitimacy, power, and urgency. Communication practitioners need to communicate with them always. For example, the shareholders. Although usually they are dominant, they can become active when they feel that their interests are not served by managers. Once the stakeholder groups have been classified considering their salience, the communication practitioners will start creating plans, and they already have a sense of the message that they will transmit and how to communicate with these groups. For example, dominant and definitive stakeholders such as employees, customers, and shareholders need to be communicated with on an ongoing basis. Companies usually do this through newsletters, events, intranet, advertising, promotional campaigns, financial reports, investor briefings, the annual general meeting for shareholders, and so. When we think about the latent stakeholders, so the dormant stakeholders, the demanding and the discretionary stakeholders, the companies don't usually invest a lot of resources in communicating with them. Stakeholder Salience Model is one of the most used tools by the communication practitioners of every company that considers corporate communication. However, there is one aspect that they need to take into account, namely the fact that the position of the groups and the stakeholders groups can change across the matrix in time, because there are changes in public opinion, there are changes in market environments, or because of a particular crisis in the organization. So stakeholders groups must be classified on an often basis. They should run this model every now and then. And finally, the third method for discovering and mapping the stakeholder groups is called the power interest matrix. Just like the Salience model, the power interest matrix works on the same principles. The objective is to categorize stakeholders on the basis of the power they possess and to the extent to which they are likely to have or show interest in the organization's activities. So remember that this model works on two axes. The power and level of interest both can be low or high. Remember that the reason why we use this model is in order to identify and classify the stakeholders groups of a company, because the communication practitioners of a company needs to know how important the stakeholders are to the company, how much influence they have, in order to create conforming campaigns of communications to their interest and to their influence they have over the company. Basically, the company wants to know who are the most important people it needs to communicate with, and who are the people that can well look at but not really invest a lot of resources in. And there is one more aspect, that as an organization or as a company, you want to communicate the relevant information to the relevant stakeholders in order to maintain your position in their mind. For example, the people who invested in your company, right? So the shareholders and the financial investors, they want to know about the activities of the company regarding the financial information, how much money the company produces, and this kind of information can be found in the annual reports. To the customers, for example, who are also important stakeholders to the company, they won't want to know the financial statement of the company. They want to know about the goods and services your company offers and about the promotions you have for the products. So this is why it is important to identify different groups of stakeholders to be able to provide them with the relevant information. So going on and looking at the power interest matrix, we see that it works on two axes. It looks at the power and the level of interest a stakeholder has in the company, and we will look now at each quadrant and explain what it means. Quadrant D are considered the key players. They have high level of interest and high power. This means that they need to be communicated constantly with. Quadrant B are the stakeholders who have high interest in the company but lower power, so they need to be kept informed of the organization in order to conserve their commitment to the company. Quadrant C stakeholders have low interest in the company but have high power. They are the most challenging to maintain relationships with because their power can decide particular activities of a company. And finally, Quadrant A have low interest in the company and low power to influence with. Therefore, communication with this group should be done with minimal effort. The communication department of a company needs to be aware that although the power usually stays the same, the level of interest of each group of stakeholders in the company might change. So these entire categories might change and fluctuate. Therefore, this model should be run on an usual basis. In conclusion, both mapping methods of stakeholder groups are important to any company or any organization because they are used to determine the importance of stakeholders groups that a company has in order to know how to create its communication strategy and communications campaigns accordingly to the relevant information that the relevant group of stakeholders needs to know about. Another important aspect why this kind of model should be run in a company is the fact that the communication practitioners will already get a sense of the key messages that they need to transmit to the relevant groups of stakeholders, so they already know that to the investors and shareholders they should communicate only financial information, and they need to know for the rest of the stakeholders groups what kind of key messages they need to transmit and base their communication campaigns on. And one final important aspect is the fact that by running this kind of models, when the company finds itself in a position like a situation of crisis or a situation of decision making for going on, the company can consult the information and the public opinion of the relevant stakeholders, because at the end of the day, the public opinion, and this is what the communication is about, having the public relation with the respective group of stakeholders in order to have the best image you can have, so the stakeholders are kept interested in your company. So basically, by knowing who they need to ask about their opinion, they can make the important decisions when they need as a company. This was everything for this video. I hope this video helped you to understand why the stakeholder groups are important to a company, why a company needs to invest time and effort in running these models to identify and analyze the interest each group has. And I hope that you remember that there are 3 ways to determine and categorize the stakeholder groups. You have the specific questions, you have the stakeholder salience model, and you also have the power interest matrix, and all of them can be used by any company and are as important as another. If you found it interesting, please keep watching the videos. You will find more videos like this in the description below. You will find them in the annotation right here, or you will also have playlists dedicated for marketing and corporate communication on my channel. If you're an entrepreneur and just created your very first company, maybe you're looking at these videos in order to learn about marketing and corporate communication to create, well, your very first communication campaign and marketing strategy. Maybe you want to create your entire business plan. Well, in this case, I've already helped you. In the links down in the description, you will find a link where you can get a very first business plan and the very first marketing and communication strategy for your company. You will have a manual with all the information that you need to know, and you will have a notebook that when completed, it will turn into your original business plan for your company. So check that out, make sure that you check that out, it's very useful. Thank you for watching the video. Check out the other videos on my channel. Leave a comment in the comment section for the algorithm. You know how YouTube is nowadays. And also, if you want to support my work, you can buy me a coffee. I run on a lot of coffee to do research for these videos, to do editing and filming for these videos. And you can support me by doing that, or you can keep watching the other videos. I'll see you at the next one. Bye.